George Brett was called the King. He ruled third base in the American League like no player before him, and every scout, every manager, every pitcher in the game knew exactly what that meant. Then Wade Boggs arrived in 1982, and the throne started to crack. Boggs was so precise, so locked into his own private world, so relentlessly and mechanically unstoppable at the plate that 9 of the greatest players who ever lived looked at him and felt something they did not want to admit. They felt threatened. They felt furious. So why did legends resent the man they simply could not beat? This is a story about one of the most dominant and divisive careers in baseball history. Wade Boggs finished with 5 batting titles, 3,010 hits, and a 91.4 career WAR. Those are Hall of Fame numbers by any measure. But numbers do not tell the whole story of who Wade Boggs was, or why so many great players could not stand to share a field with him. To understand the jealousy, you have to understand the era first. The 1980s were a warrior era in baseball. The men who mattered drove in runs, played through pain, hit in the clutch, and sacrificed personally for the team. You moved runners. You took the sacrifice fly. You swung hard enough to leave bruises on the air itself. That was the code, and nearly every man in the big leagues lived by it without question. Wade Boggs did not live by that code. He wrote his own. Every single day of his career ran on a schedule so rigid, it looked, to outside eyes, like something between genius and madness. He ate chicken before every game, always poultry. His teammates called him the Chicken Man.
Well, you eat chicken before every game, is that right?
Right, every day game or just before night game. I have to have chicken, but on day games, the old adage, which came first, chicken or the egg, so you have egg.
And the nickname did not always come with warmth behind it. He took exactly 150 ground balls before every game. Not 148, not 151, exactly 150. He sprinted from the dugout to the left field line at exactly 7:17 every evening. He drew the Hebrew word chai in the dirt of the batter's box before every plate appearance. Without fail, regardless of the city or the situation. Everything was controlled. Everything was Boggs and only Boggs. To Boggs, this was discipline. To his peers, it looked like a man who had decided his own rituals and numbers mattered more than anything happening around him. It looked like a man who had built walls around himself inside a game that was supposed to be about unity. And here is what made it worse. Every ritual worked. Boggs hit .328 for his career. He walked 1,412 times. His on-base percentage sat at .415, one of the highest in the history of the game. He exhausted pitchers pitch by pitch, worked counts into the deep end, took the walk when it was offered, and sprayed line drives to every part of the field like a machine running on perfect fuel. If you want more stories like this one, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It tells the platform this content matters and keeps more of it coming. Now let us get back to the Chicken Man, because what he did to 9 of the greatest players in the game is something the history books only hint at. The era Boggs played in rewarded the visible, the home run leaving the park, the catcher blocking a pitch in the dirt, the outfielder diving and coming up bleeding. A walk did not look like heroism. Working a 3-2 count and taking ball 4 did not look like grit. To the men who valued sacrifice and physical courage, watching Boggs operate felt like watching someone win a fight by stepping aside instead of throwing a punch. What followed was inevitable. Resentment spread through clubhouses, crossed league lines, and jumped from decade to decade. 9 legends, some of the most respected players of their generation, found themselves looking at Wade Boggs and feeling something cold and honest and hard to admit. They felt jealous. They felt dismissed. They felt replaced. We're going through every single one of them now, starting with the man who built his entire legend on the exact opposite of everything Boggs represented. Number 1, Cal Ripken Jr. Number 1 on this list is Cal Ripken Jr. And if you want to understand why this one cuts the deepest, start with what Ripken stood for. He was not just a great baseball player. He was a symbol of everything the sport told itself it valued most. He played 2,632 consecutive games without ever asking for a day off. Through illness, through injury, through the grinding weight of 162 game seasons stacked back to back for over a decade. He showed up every single time. The 2 men actually crossed paths before either of them had made it to the big leagues. In April of 1981, Ripken was playing for the Rochester Red Wings, and Boggs was with the Pawtucket Red Sox. Those 2 teams played the longest game in professional baseball history, a marathon that stretched 33 innings before a league curfew stopped play. The game was suspended and resumed months later. Ripken stayed in that game because that was what his brand demanded. Duty first. Team first. always. Boggs was already building something different in Pawtucket. Where Ripken was institutional, Boggs was personal. Where Ripken believed in collective standards and shared sacrifice, Boggs believed in the Boggs way, a private universe of ritual preparation that no teammate was invited into and no manager was allowed to alter. The chicken, the ground ball count, the sprints, the symbols, all of it served one person and one process. Ripken reportedly found the whole thing baffling at best and contemptible at worst. To a man who drew his identity from reliability and selflessness, the idea that a player needed a ritual safety net of superstitions to perform felt like mental weakness. A true professional prepared because it was his responsibility, not because he had built an elaborate mythology around his own readiness. The jealousy here was philosophical more than anything else. Ripken's brand was universal and beloved. His streak made him a national treasure in every ballpark in the country. Fans who had no connection to Baltimore loved Ripken because what he represented was pure and easy to admire. Boggs was more divisive. Half the baseball world respected his discipline. The other half found his routine theatrical and his focus on personal statistics quietly corrosive to the team concept. The Iron Man versus the Chicken Man. One built his legacy on showing up without being asked. The other built his legacy on preparing in a way nobody else could follow. Both became Hall of Famers, but only one of them left a trail of teammates who resented the very rituals that made him great. The man coming in at number 2 had very specific feelings about what those rituals did and did not prove about actual defensive skill. Number 2, Greg Nettles. Number 2 is Greg Nettles, and the frustration here is surgical. Nettles was not the most famous third baseman of his era, but he was arguably the best defensive third baseman in the American League during his peak years. He led all third basemen in assists and double plays. He made plays in the field that caused opposing managers to walk back to the dugout with nothing to say. Defense was not a skill Nettles had alongside everything else. It was his entire identity. So when Wade Boggs started winning Gold Glove awards in 1994 and 1995 with the New York Yankees, Nettles had a reaction that was sharp and specific and rooted in something real. The issue was not whether Boggs had improved as a defender. He had. His early career in Boston had been shaky, and by his mid-30s, he had developed into a solid third baseman. But solid was not Gold Glove caliber, and the suspicion among defensive specialists like Nettles was pointed. They believed Boggs won those awards because of who he was, not what his glove was doing in 1994 and 1995. His batting average, his hits record, his fame had created a halo that spread over everything, including categories where he had not necessarily earned the top spot. Nettles understood what it felt like to go unrecognized for your specific craft. His career batting average of .248 kept Hall of Fame voters from fully appreciating what he gave the game on defense. He lived for years in the enormous shadow of Brooks Robinson, who had redefined what defense at third base could look like. Nettles was exceptional and chronically undervalued, and he had watched recognition for defensive excellence get withheld from deserving players his entire career. Then he watched it get handed to a hitter. The detail that stuck in the throats of defensive purists was the 150 ground ball routine. To Nettles and others who valued the instinctive nature of real defensive greatness, that counted rep approach looked less like preparation and more like performance. Real defenders did not count their reps. Real defenders had natural hands and feet and anticipation that no routine could manufacture. You either had the gift or you did not, and simulating it with a quota was not the same thing as possessing it. Boggs's offensive fame had a gravitational pull that dragged all recognition toward him, even recognition that belonged in other departments to other men. For a player who spent decades earning defensive respect in small increments, watching a hitter collect those awards felt like a specific and personal injustice. Number 3 on this list had a one-word verdict for the whole situation, and that word was soft. Number 3, Carlton Fisk. Number 3 is Carlton Fisk, and the word Fisk used for Boggs tells you everything you need to know about this conflict. The word was soft. In the vocabulary of Carlton Fisk, that was not an insult thrown around casually. It was a verdict. Fisk was the iron backbone of the Boston Red Sox clubhouse for years. As a catcher, he took foul tips to the mask, blocked pitches in the dirt with his chest, and called 9 innings of strategy before being expected to hit with authority in the lineup. He played through injuries that would have shelved most players for weeks. Physical sacrifice was not something you did in special circumstances. It was the daily price of playing the game seriously. Wade Boggs did not pay that price in any form Fisk recognized. Boggs retreated into his corner before games and did his rituals in a private bubble that shut out the rest of the team. His focus was entirely inward. His process served his batting average and his personal preparation, and nothing else. To a man who believed baseball demanded collective sacrifice, watching a teammate build a wall around himself and call it professionalism looked like cowardice wearing a uniform. Fisk's resentment ran deeper than professional competition. It was moral. He believed real sacrifice meant lifting a fly ball to score a run, even if it risked dropping your average. It meant playing hurt without telling anyone. It meant putting the scoreboard above everything personal when the moment required it. Boggs refused that bargain, repeatedly and consistently, and without apparent guilt. The early defensive struggles made the whole thing worse. In his first years in Boston, Boggs was widely seen as a liability at third base. He was a one-way player who gave you everything with the bat and very little with the glove, which meant the warriors around him were carrying more of the total load. To Fisk, who prided himself on contributing at every level of the game, watching a teammate thrive under that lopsided arrangement was something he could never fully accept. The negative framing Fisk carried was simple and permanent. He believed Boggs had found a way to be excellent on his own terms, while everyone else bled to win games around him. To a man defined by sacrifice, that looked like a very intentional form of selfishness. And number 4 had his own version of the same complaint, except his frustration was about something Boggs stole without even trying. Number 4, Rickey Henderson. Number 4 is Rickey Henderson, and this one is different from the others because it was not really about talent. Both men were extraordinary. Both were future Hall of Famers. The problem in 1993 on the New York Yankees was that there was only so much oxygen in the room, and neither man was willing to breathe less. Rickey Henderson was the greatest leadoff hitter in the history of baseball. He held the all-time stolen base record. He could change a game in the first inning by walking, stealing second, moving to third on a groundout, and scoring before the other team had even settled in. He was electric. He talked about himself in the third person. He admired his own home runs as they left the park. He believed with every fiber of his being that he was the main character in whatever story was being told. Then Wade Boggs showed up in pinstripes and brought his circus with him. Henderson found the Boggs routine genuinely bizarre. The pregame chicken, the timed sprints, the exactly 150 ground balls, the symbol in the batter's box. To a man who operated on instinct and natural brilliance, the idea that a player needed this elaborate mythology to perform did not register as discipline. It registered as weakness. A true superstar stepped up and delivered because that was who he was. Boggs's reliance on superstition was, in Rickey's eyes, a man who did not fully trust himself without a safety net. But what actually stung Henderson the most was simpler than philosophy. The media loved the rituals. Reporters who walked into that Yankees clubhouse had a ready-made story in Wade Boggs. They asked about the chicken. They wrote features about the ground ball count. They wanted to know about the 7-17 sprints. Boggs pulled camera time and column space with his eccentricity in a way that had nothing to do with stolen bases or showmanship. Boggs was stealing attention without trying to steal anything. He was becoming the headline not because he demanded it, but because his routines were irresistible as a story. And Rickey, who had spent his entire career building an audience around being the most fascinating man in any room, found himself sharing that distinction with a man eating chicken in the corner. The showman versus the ritualist. Two enormous talents, one clubhouse. And the next man on this list had already been wearing the crown before Boggs came to take it without asking permission. Number 5, George Brett. Number 5 is George Brett, and this is the one the thumbnail was built on. He was the king, not just of third base, not just of the American League, but of the idea of what a great hitter could look like as a human being. His 1980 season, when he nearly hit 400 and won the AL MVP, set a standard that felt permanent. He was passionate. He was emotional. He swung the bat with reckless commitment, and it made fans lean forward every time he dug in. Then, 1982 arrived, and Wade Boggs walked into the American League, and the throne started looking a lot less solid. The contrast between the two men was almost too clean to be believable. Brett was fire. He charged the mound. He argued with umpires with visible outrage. He played with feeling, and it connected him to fans in a way that went beyond statistics. You respected Brett even when your team was playing against him because of what he poured into every at-bat. Boggs was ice. He was still. He was a man who could work a count to 3-2, foul off 6 pitches, take ball 4, and jog to first without changing his expression once. His greatness was cold and mathematical, and almost unsettling in how detached it was from any obvious emotion. By the mid-1980s, Boggs had become the new face of third base excellence in the American League. His consecutive All-Star selections and batting titles pushed Brett's era firmly into the past tense. Brett eventually moved to first base and designated hitter, a quiet acknowledgement that the position had a new identity and a new king. Brett's resentment was about displacement. He had spent years defining what a great hitting third baseman looked like: aggressive, emotional, connected to the moment, leading from the front. Boggs replaced that definition with something colder and more detached. Brett made highlight reels. Boggs made statisticians happy. And in the contest between those two kinds of greatness, Boggs kept walking away with the batting titles, while Brett's style slowly became a relic of a more romantic version of the game. He was the king, and he was dethroned quietly, methodically, and without any acknowledgement that a throne had been taken. Number 6 had a different kind of crown to protect. Number 6, Tony Gwynn. Number 6 is Tony Gwynn, and this one is different from the others because the surface level of it looked entirely respectful. These two men were the premier contact hitters of their era. Both finished with more than 3,000 career hits. Both were elite batting average hitters at a time when the home run was beginning to swallow the sport whole. On paper, they were allies in a dying art form. Two men fighting to keep precision hitting alive in a world that was increasingly asking batters to just hit the ball over the fence. But underneath the mutual respect was something smaller and sharper, and very specific to people who take enormous pride in being the best at one exact thing. Gwynn won 8 batting titles. 8. Boggs won 5. And the gap between those two numbers reportedly sat with Boggs in a way that was uncomfortable and persistent. His argument, at least internally, was rooted in context. He was playing in the American League East, arguably the most competitive division in baseball, against the best pitching talent the sport had to offer. Getting a batting title in that environment was harder than earning one in the National League West. The road to Gwynn's 8 felt softer, at least from where Boggs was standing. Gwynn had his own feelings about the comparison. He was said to marvel at Boggs's walk totals, that extraordinary 1,412 career figure that pushed his on-base percentage to .415, a number significantly higher than Gwynn's .388. Marveling and feeling entirely comfortable with the comparison were two different things. The media loved setting the two men up as opposites. Gwynn was the natural, the man who could reach any pitch and put it somewhere useful, because God had given him the most perfect set of hands and eyes in the history of the position. Boggs was the technician, the man who engineered every plate appearance, like a controlled experiment, manipulating the strike zone and running up pitch counts until pitchers had nothing left to offer. Each man's pride lived in the part of the story the media used to describe the other. Gwynn was natural, which implied that what he did came purely from talent. Labeling Boggs as the disciplined technician implied a manufactured quality to his excellence, something built rather than born. And the flip side of that framing implied that Gwynn's approach, as beautiful and instinctive as it was, left walks on the table that a more calculating hitter would have collected without a second thought. The war of the margins between these two men was fought entirely in percentage points and batting title counts, and the quiet keeping of score that elite players do when they are watching each other from a distance. Neither needed a confrontation to feel the friction. The comparison itself was enough. Both men believed their specific approach was the more pure expression of the art of hitting. The fact that the media could not definitively settle the argument only kept the rivalry burning at a low, steady heat for the entirety of their careers. Number 7 had no patience for low and steady. His grievance with Boggs was loud and personal, and it went places that none of the other names on this list dared to go. Number 7, Oil Can Boyd. Number 7 is Dennis Boyd, better known everywhere in baseball as Oil Can Boyd. And unlike every other entry on this list, what happened between Boyd and Boggs was not a philosophical disagreement or a quiet rivalry fueled by batting averages and award votes. It was a direct, personal, and deeply charged conflict that exposed the fault lines running underneath the surface of one of the most celebrated teams in American League history. Boyd was one of the most colorful and combustible pitchers in Red Sox history. He was electric on the mound when things were working for him, and volatile when they were not. He played with visible emotion, lived near the edge of his own limits, and carried his grievances like a man who had spent his whole life being told that the rules did not quite apply equally to him and everyone around him. His central accusation against Boggs was specific and damning. He claimed the Red Sox ran a 2-tier clubhouse. The first tier was for Wade Boggs. The second tier was for everyone else. Boyd believed that Boggs received protection and accommodation from the Red Sox organization that was tied directly to his status as a white statistical superstar in a city with a complicated and well-documented history of racial tension. The chicken ritual was tolerated. The ground ball routine was accommodated. The timed sprints were scheduled around. The batter's box symbols were looked at with curiosity and even affection by management. Boggs got to be eccentric. Others were expected to be soldiers. When Boyd expressed his own personality and his own way of doing things, he felt pushed back. He felt managed. He felt that the same organization that made space for Boggs in every possible way had very little patience for Dennis Boyd being Dennis Boyd. And Boyd went further than a general complaint about favoritism. He alleged that Boggs used racial slurs in the clubhouse. This was the sharpest possible charge. Boggs denied it completely and called Boyd delusional. The two accounts could not both be true, and the truth of what happened in that Boston clubhouse in the 1980s likely never fully left the room. But the broader picture Boyd was describing is what matters here, and it did not require the racial slur accusation to carry weight. A player whose extraordinary output protected him from normal accountability, a clubhouse culture that rewarded statistical accumulation over messy, passionate human contribution to the team, a system that gave one man the freedom to be an island while others were required to serve the collective. Whether Boyd's account was accurate in every detail or not, the dynamic he described was real enough to produce lasting, visible bitterness. His resentment was not the kind born from admiration twisted sideways. It was the harder kind. It was resentment of a system that appeared to place one man above the rules and charge others the price for that arrangement. And number 8 watched Boggs collect honors from inside that protected world and found his own very specific reasons to feel the weight of the unfairness. Number 8, Don Mattingly. Number 8 is Don Mattingly, and this rivalry has a kind of tragic elegance to it, because Mattingly was, by almost every measure that mattered in 1980s baseball, the superior player during his peak years. He was the gritty, blue-collar hitman of the New York Yankees, a captain in everything but title, a man who played the game with passion and precision, and an all-around completeness that made him the most beloved player in the Bronx during a decade when the Yankees were not winning championships, but Mattingly was giving their fans something worth watching anyway. From 1984 to 1989, Mattingly averaged 27 home runs and 114 RBI per season. He won 9 Gold Gloves. He was a superior defensive first baseman and a superior producer of runs and a superior leader of men by every standard the baseball world of that era cared about. People who watched him every day believed, with good reason, that Don Mattingly was the best all-around player in the American League. And the batting titles kept going to Boggs. The most visible individual honor for a hitter in that era, the crown that sat above everything else, went to Boston year after year. In 1986, Mattingly put together one of the best offensive seasons in recent memory. He hit .352 with 238 hits and 31 home runs and 113 RBI. He was extraordinary by any reasonable measure. He finished second. Boggs hit .357 with 207 hits and 8 home runs and 71 RBI and took the title. The math told a story that stung. Boggs was better at the one thing the award measured. He was the better hitter when hitter meant batting average, nothing more and nothing less. But Mattingly was the better baseball player in almost every other category that the game itself actually ran on. He drove in runs. He hit in the spots that decided games. He played defense at the highest level. He led by example every day of the season. And yet, the award went to the man who walked more and swung less, and constructed his excellence in a way that looked, to Mattingly's supporters, like a specialist winning a generalist trophy. The media framing made the whole thing sharper. Mattingly was cast as the warrior, the complete player who gave everything to win games. Boggs was the specialist, the man who maximized his own output inside a carefully managed box of personal discipline. The degree of difficulty argument was always underneath the surface. Mattingly was swinging for damage and producing it. Boggs was engineering plate appearances and collecting the results without ever taking the kind of swing that risked everything. When Boggs joined the Yankees in 1993, as Mattingly was descending into injury-shortened seasons and diminishing production, Boggs stepped directly into the space Mattingly had occupied and won the Gold Gloves that Mattingly's fans felt should have gone to their man in his prime. That particular sequence of events added a final layer to a rivalry that Mattingly had no clean way to win. Mattingly did not make the World Series until his final season in 1995. Boggs won a ring with the Yankees in 1996 and was photographed famously riding a police horse around the warning track in pure celebration. That image said everything about how the two careers diverged in the end. Last on the countdown, but first in terms of setting the tone for every other conflict on this list, is number 9. Number 9, Jim Rice. Number 9 is Jim Rice, and if you understand the culture of the Red Sox clubhouse in the 1980s, nothing that follows is going to surprise you. Rice was the captain in the way that real captains are made, not through a vote or a title, but through performance and presence and a set of values that the whole room understood without anyone needing to put them into words. Rice was an RBI man. He led the American League in home runs multiple times. He hit the ball with the kind of physical authority that made pitchers approach him differently than they approached anyone else in the lineup. He struck out 1,423 times in his career, which only sounds like a weakness until you understand that in his world, strikeouts were the acceptable cost of swinging hard enough to change the outcome of a game. You swung, you accepted the consequences. You drove in the run when the run needed to be driven in. That was baseball, as Jim Rice understood it, and as he expected the men around him to practice it. And for a while, it worked. He was one of the most feared hitters in the American League, a man whose power numbers in the late 1970s and early 1980s defined what the middle of a batting order was supposed to look like. When Rice dug in, the entire ballpark felt it. The left side of the infield shifted. Pitchers went to their best stuff immediately. That was power, real power, the kind that announces itself before the swing. Boggs had 745 strikeouts and 1,412 walks in his career. Those numbers carry the entire philosophy. Those numbers tell you everything about the distance between the two philosophies in that same clubhouse. Where Rice accepted outs as the price of maximum aggression, Boggs avoided outs with almost pathological commitment. He was not there to drive in runs. He was there to get on base, to make pitchers work, to protect his average, and to let the scoring system work itself out around the precision of his approach. The flashpoint that crystallized Rice's resentment was specific and repeated often enough to become a defining tension. Runner on third base, fewer than 2 outs. In Rice's manual, that situation had one response: an aggressive attempt to lift the baseball into the outfield and score the run, the sacrifice fly. It was the responsible, team-first play, and it was as close to a requirement as the unwritten code of that era could produce. Boggs would often take a different path. He stayed with his approach. He worked the count. He hit the line drive to wherever the defense gave him room, or he took the walk if the pitcher offered it. The run might not score. The batting average stayed intact. Rice read that as selfishness, straightforward and undeniable. Boggs was protecting his numbers when the team needed him to put the numbers away and do what the moment required. The fact that Boggs had a principled and statistically supported reason for his choices did not change what it looked like from Rice's side of the clubhouse, or how it made the men who valued sacrifice feel about their teammate. And as Rice's own power numbers began to fade in the mid-1980s, while Boggs was entering his peak, hitting .363 with an on-base percentage of .461 in 1987, the definitions of what made a hitter great were visibly and permanently shifting. The spotlight was moving away from the bruising run producer and toward the surgical accumulator. Rice's version of excellence was being replaced, and Boggs was the most visible and unavoidable symbol of that change. This was not just personal jealousy between two players. It was a generation watching the sport they had built get redefined by someone who never swung as hard as them, never hit the ball as far, never seemed to bleed for the at-bat the way they bled, and somehow walked away with 5 batting titles and a Hall of Fame plaque anyway. That is what this list was really about. Not 9 men who disliked one player. 9 men who watched the game they loved break apart and reassemble into something colder. And 1 man standing at the center of the whole transformation, eating chicken and counting ground balls. Wade Boggs was, in many ways, the first modern player. The kind of hitter that the next wave of thinkers and analysts would point to and say, this is what it looks like when a player fully grasps the value of reaching base. His 1,412 walks, his .415 on-base percentage, his strike zone discipline that turned every single plate appearance into an extended negotiation with the pitcher, all of that looks like pure brilliance in hindsight. It looks like the future arriving ahead of schedule, wearing a Red Sox jersey and eating grilled chicken before the game. But in the moment, to the men who had built their identities on a different set of values, Boggs looked like a problem. He looked like someone winning arguments that the rest of the game had not agreed to have yet. Wade Boggs was feared. He was feared by pitchers in both leagues who knew that every at-bat against him was going to be longer than it should be. He was resented by peers who could not find a clean way to criticize what he was producing. And he was looked at sideways by teammates who could not understand how anyone could live inside that kind of rigid personal routine and emerge on the other side hitting .328 every single year. But here is what those 9 legends could not stop, no matter how much they disliked the process. He changed the game. The walks changed how teams thought about lineup construction. The strike zone discipline helped lay the groundwork for the analytical era that followed. His career proved, in the most undeniable way possible, that you did not need to swing hard to be great. You could be precise. You could be patient. You could eat chicken every day before work and count your ground balls like rosary beads and still end up with 3,010 hits and a plaque in Cooperstown. The 9 legends on this list were great too, each and every one of them. Their frustration with Boggs was real, but so was their brilliance. This era produced some of the finest baseball players the sport has ever seen, and the friction between them and the Chicken Man made the whole thing more interesting than any of them probably wanted to admit. Jealousy at the highest level is really just respect wearing a different mask. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below telling me which of these 9 rivalries you think ran the deepest. See you in the next one.